What's up, everybody? Coach Ceelo here, and welcome to the 15th episode of the No Bullshit Six-Figure Sales Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about step 9 in the sales process, the pitch. Now, for those with no process at all, shame on you. You should know better by now. This is what everybody thought the presentation was, right? Everybody thinks that the pitch is the presentation. Guys, the pitch is not the presentation. The pitch is what you learn from manuals and videos from your company almost, right? The pitch is just you explaining the features and benefits. We do it a little differently here, but you get what I'm saying? The art behind this, the magic, is what happens around the pitch, not what happens during the pitch, right? So for those with no process, this is what they thought the presentation was. It should be the easiest part of your whole presentation, okay? Because it's two things. It's standard memorized explanation, and then aside from that, you've got personal threads weaved in, talking to their specific objections, likes, needs, conditions, the whole 9 yards, right? So, the whole point to this is that it's almost getting to the grand culmination here. The grand culmination is going to be the close. But this is where you're making the case, right? This is where you're explaining everything to them. And really, this is where you're taking everything that you got from the discovery now and you're laying it out. So as you're talking about the product and as you are explaining everything in a specific order, I'm going to be telling you guys what I'm talking about in just a bit, right? You're also weaving in the objections and how you're going to overcome those objections, right? Third-party stories, stuff like that. And so now they're logically coming to the conclusion that A, they have a problem or a need for something, that B, this industry solves that problem, C, this company solves that problem, D, if there are other competitors that do what you do, they don't have the same solution that you have, E, that you're the person that can get them where they want to go, and then starting to loop into the close that now's the time to do it. So, all right. Everything is seamlessly packaged like features and benefits, even though it's much more than that, right? So let's start with the questions that you answer in the presentation, right? You answer why the industry, why the company, why the product, why me, and why now, right? Now, why me? We already took care of that way up front in the presentation when we were doing the who am I and when we talked about that. So you already took care of that. Now, why this company? Well, you start your pitch with a little bit of company history. It should explain why this company is like no other and why there should be a better fit with us than with anyone else. Everything that they've tried before and didn't work or didn't work as good as they could have has nothing to do with what we're doing. Why is this the reason why everything else has not worked and this will? All right? Why this product? Well, that's the features and benefits, how it works and how it'll solve their problems. But make sure to tie it into them. Remember that we asked them, what 3 things should we talk about today that would help you decide if you wanted to move forward with this? Be specific, right? This is sales, old school, what I'm about to say, but it's a great phrase. What this means for you is ... right? So it's not just explaining the feature and benefit, but tie it in with them. Let them know why that's going to solve their problems and why it's going to make their life easier. Remember something, people aren't buying the product, they're buying what it does for them, and this is where you explain that. Cover the objections here. Use the third-party stories. Loop if you have to. Sum it all up so the only possible conclusion is that they need the product and the best option is this company. Now, most companies already have a standard pitch, right? You need to make it yours and have it down to where you can play with it, backwards and forwards. Why? Because just like the rest of the presentation, the more of this that you have canned and you have down, now they don't know that. Remember, you use tonality, you use expressions, you use pattern interrupts to make it real, to make it in the now, and be in the now with them when you're doing it, right? Be there with them. Let them feel like it's authentic. And it is. But you still have this framework. You still have this structure that you can do sleeping. You can do it in your sleep if you had to. And the reason why is because the better that you get at this, both in the pitch and during your whole presentation eventually, is that you can focus on little things now that you wouldn't be able to focus. See, I know my pitches so well that I could literally be doing other things while I'm doing it. Now I'm looking at you and I'm smiling and I'm talking, but I could also be like, okay, are they leaning in? Are they moving back? Do they have their arms crossed? Is it cold in the room? Because sometimes arms crossed doesn't necessarily mean they're closed, but it could be in body language, right? So it gives you time to assess tonality, body language. Sometimes there's even little slip-ups when they're talking. You notice a change in tone, or you notice they said a word, and it leads you to understand that there's a concern or a question. All these little things that you wouldn't be able to do if you were so worried about what's coming out of your mouth next. And remember something, we're already, just by nature of how I show you guys how to do this, by nature, we're talkers, right? This is a talking presentation. Everybody knows that you should listen more than you talk. But when you're dealing with a one call close or a one presentation close, you've got to be able to get everything out while you're doing it, right? So it's good to be mindful that as you're talking and as you're doing things, you can pick up on these subtle little clues to kind of take you over that hump. And P.S., don't give it all away. Have a part 2 to the pitch, right? It's because when you go in for the close, if for whatever reason, something that, remember, we removed all the arrows from the quiver way up front. That stacks the deck in our hand. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to come up with something else later, right? So you need to leave some room for you to be able to loop, all right? I've used that word many times before. And this is something that I learned from Jordan Belfort and from the straight line persuasion system. But everybody's been doing it forever. He's not the only one that's done it. He just put a name to it, and he got a very concise system. But looping is just when you go to handle, you go to close, and an objection comes up, and that's how you handle the objection, right? So you go through a way of handling the objection, and we've talked about handling objections already before, right? And then you loop back to a second pitch, and then you go in for the close again. So when you're closing, and I'm going to cover this in the next one anyway. I'll cover it in the next one. Just know, don't give it all in that one pitch. Save a little bit for a second pitch and maybe even a third pitch, so that if you have to come back in, you still have something else to talk to them about. Now, if you do it the way I'm showing you guys to do it, the majority of the times, they're going to literally close themselves. Like literally, you're going to be getting a lot more sales up front with less resistance, because this whole presentation is designed to do that, right? But like I said, shit happens. There's going to be times when, a second objection or a third objection is going to come up. Remember what I always say about objections too. The first one's usually bullshit anyway, right? But anyway, just have that second and third pitch ready so that if you have to loop a second time or a third time, I wouldn't loop more than 3 times. I just wouldn't. That's already, listen, unless there's a lot of rapport and there's interest, then yes. You know how people say, oh, people say no 5 times, 6 times. You can get the no's out earlier anyway, right? But the thing is that the way this is set up, you've already taken most of the objections out of the way. So if they're giving you a second objection, then they're giving you a third objection, they're clearly just looking for ways not to do this. And not only that, but you're burning them out a little bit. Now, depending on who you work for and what you do, if you work for yourself or you work for someone else, a lot of companies, they don't want you to burn their lead. That lead costs them a lot of money. I come from places where leads cost $800 to $1,000. And so even if you didn't get the sale, they don't want you burning that lead, taking them down to the point where they're so irritated by the conversation that they never want to hear from that company again, because it costs them $800 to $1,000 to acquire that person, right? So they'd rather keep them in the loop, even if it's the company loop and not your loop, right? So that later on they have another chance. Anyway, have a second or third pitch. And if you do that, then you'll definitely be able to do a lot better than what you're doing right now. So let's kind of put everything together of what I just said, all right? You're going to start talking about the credibility of the company. You don't need to talk about the credibility of yourself because you already did that earlier. So you're going to talk about the credibility of the company, maybe even a little bit of the industry, then the company. Then you go right into the product. So for me, this is actually the boring part of the presentation, guys. It really is, because it's redundant to me. But remember something that for them, it's not, right? This is the first time they're hearing it. So you're on stage and it's showtime. Give it some pow, give it some power, give it some excitement. This is where you've got to really turn it up, because it gets boring for you, not for them. So talk about the product, talk about the features, talk about the benefits, but more importantly, link it to the reasons why they said that they needed for this to make sense for them. Overcome the objections before they mention them, the ones that they told you about previously, which, by the way, you already seeded, right, in that discovery summary that you did. So it was already kind of handled, but now you're going to cement it in. And if you did a good job of explaining the industry, you did a good job of explaining the product, you did a good job of overcoming the objections that you already knew were there. And if they were honest with you from beginning, remember, buyers are liars, right? But if they were honest from the beginning, this is where people are already closing themselves. And you'll see it happen. If you didn't start trying to sell in the discovery and you did everything exactly the way I've laid it out, they're going to start asking you buying questions while you're doing the pitch, which is perfect. It's exactly what you wanted. That lets you know you're ready for the next stage, which is the close. Guys, my name is Coach Ceelo, and I have helped hundreds of salespeople break through, reach, attain, and maintain 6 figures. And you keep watching my videos, you'll be the next.